Welcome to Good Morning Transfers. We start with some breaking news, and that is that Manchester City and Atletico Madrid have agreed a deal for Julian Alvarez for up to £81 million. Talks have been progressing well between the clubs over the last 24 hours. Atletico will pay £64 million up front, with a further £17 million of potential add-ons. That'll be a record sale for City, and it represents a huge profit on the £14 million they paid River Plate for the Argentine forward back in January 2022. Personal terms still have to be agreed, although they are not expected to be a problem. A warm welcome to Dan, Sam and Kwaku. I mean, we start with some breaking news, Dan. Julian Alvarez now on his way to Atletico Madrid.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, what a way to start the show. I mean, this is going to be undoubtedly one of the signings of the window in Europe, I think. And, you know, we've been talking about Julian Alvarez over the last few weeks, whether this signing could happen, would it happen? And it's very interesting when we've seen, you know, him go to the Olympics. Pep Guardiola has been quite, coy, I think, when we've heard him talk about, and we've heard Guardiola talk about, Kevin De Bruyne and talk about how important he is to his future plans, whereas Alvarez has felt somewhat different. I think the interesting thing with Alvarez is, a few weeks ago it seemed that he felt he wasn't playing in the big games last season. And I think we saw that a little bit. He didn't start in the FA Cup final, the Champions League quarterfinals, and he didn't play in the last 4 games of the Premier League season in terms of starting as well. So hopefully this move, if it happens, when it happens, he'll feel like he'll be one of the star men at Atletico Madrid under Diego Simeone.
Right, let's head straight to the Etihad then, where our reporter Ben Ransom is. Ben, we're just getting this story reaching us now. Julian Alvarez off to Atletico Madrid. Can you just recap for us what we now know?
Yes, well, we know that talks have been ongoing between the two clubs, and in the last 24 hours they were certainly moving in the right direction. Well, that has moved again significantly this morning. You're absolutely spot on in what you've been saying. That fee now agreed, and it would be a record sale for Manchester City. And to put that in some sort of context, remember, they signed this player, Julian Alvarez, for £14 million. Essentially, when they were talking to Atletico Madrid, they said that they wanted at least 5 times what they paid for him if he was to move in this transfer window. Well, Atletico Madrid clearly have designated this is the player they want to build their future around. 24 years old, he's won every single major honour in the game, which is quite remarkable, both domestically here in England, but also the Copa America and indeed the World Cup with Argentina as well. £81 million this total deal will be worth. That's €95 million. That means £64 million paid up front. That's €75 million plus potential further add-ons of £17 million. So it is a quite remarkable sale for Manchester City, and yet more success. I mean, it's credit to the club, isn't it? It's credit to their scouting department. Remember when he came in, there was a lot of excitement, but Dan was absolutely right in what he was saying. This is a player who, while he played almost as many minutes as anyone in the City squad over the last year, I think he felt that he was being slightly sidelined in the most important matches. If you look back at the end of the season, for example, he didn't start the FA Cup final. He didn't start any of the final 4 Premier League matches as City were in that really close tussle with Arsenal to try and lift the trophy. And indeed, he didn't start either of the Champions League quarter-final legs against Real Madrid. So perhaps in his mind, as he went away for the summer, went away for the Copa America and indeed the Olympics, Julian Alvarez was just thinking how pivotal he was always going to be when you've got someone like Erling Haaland in front of you in that pecking order. Well, Pep Guardiola, Manchester City, they don't like to keep unhappy players. They've always said if the right offer comes in, they will allow players to leave who don't want to be here anymore. Well, the right offer has come in. That deal then has been agreed financially. The structures have been agreed. It's now up to the player to finalise personal terms.
Ben, you've mentioned there how much of a brilliant deal it is financially for Manchester City. I mean, they've, got such a huge profit in what they paid for him, but it's a transfer that works for both Julian Alvarez and Manchester City right now, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly that. I mean, as I was intimating there, City don't keep players here who don't want to be here, provided the offer's right. I mean, there have been countless examples of players who have perhaps had their head turned slightly, been tempted by moves, but the money's never been put up. But In this case, clearly Atletico Madrid were in the market for a forward, for a striker, and they've seen Alvarez as the man they want to build their team around. And for Alvarez, it means he gets to go to a Spanish-speaking country, which obviously will be fantastic and make it a little bit easier for him to settle potentially. But also with that kind of fee, £81 million total fee, that's the sort of fee that is very much a statement of intent, is that you are going to be our main man. So I think that'll be hugely tempting for him as well, and he'll get to effectively get out of Erling Haaland's shadow and go and be the main man at another huge club and challenge for more honours. So from City's point of view, yeah, look, I mean, you can't, the profit's huge. It's a record sale for them. This is a club that does sell really, really well, doesn't it? So I suppose the question now remains is whether or not they deem it necessary to bring someone in to replace him.
Ben obviously goes over to Atletico Madrid, which means he can leave the miserable rain in Manchester and he can go and enjoy the sunshine over there. You mentioned Pep Guardiola, and he doesn't mind if players don't want to play for him, and he won't keep them. But how much of a blow do you think it will be, given how much he values him, perhaps values him, to not sell him to another Premier League club?
Yeah, I mean, it is interesting because he's certainly settled really well. I mean, I mentioned there that he's played almost as many minutes as anyone. I think it's only Rodri, Ederson, Phil Foden and Kyle Walker that played more minutes for Manchester City than Julian Alvarez last season. So he was clearly very integral. But I think it's exactly that. I think it's just in the biggest games, he wasn't quite yet at the level where Pep felt he was first choice when everyone was fit, when De Bruyne's there, when Haaland's there. So I think from their point of view, I think he's been hugely important. I think it's 36 goals he's scored across 103 appearances across those 2 seasons. And certainly an exciting player. When he came off the bench, he often had an impact. He's a very, very talented player, and you don't win World Cups and Copa Americas without being that. And I suppose from City's point of view, from Pep's point of view now, they've got a week or two till the start of the season. They've got to look at the squad, the shape of the squad, and just ascertain whether they feel they've got enough in that attacking department. They've been obviously linked with other players. I mean, rewind to the start of the summer, and potentially an attacking midfielder, a forward, a wide player, someone in that ilk was on their potential shopping list. It has been for a couple of seasons. You just wonder whether this money particularly might just tempt them into the market, because the last thing Pep Guardiola will want to do is go into the Premier League season feeling short, because City have been the team to beat, but Pep has also relied on all of his players. The fact that Alvarez wants to leave because he wants to play and start more big matches and yet has played almost as many minutes as anyone tells you how well Pep manages to use his squad. So he will need every single one of those bodies if he's to keep off and fend off the challenges of the likes of Arsenal over the next, 9-12 months.
Yeah. It will be really interesting, won't it, for Pep Guardiola to see whether Pep Guardiola will replace Julian Alvarez in that position. Just finally, the last few weeks, there was a lot of speculation around Ederson and Kevin De Bruyne's future. What do you think? Do you think both of them will be staying at the Etihad this summer?
I think that's going to happen now. Yeah, I mean, it sounds like certainly. I mean, I wasn't away with City on their US tour, but everything that Pep Guardiola said in and around those matches while they were away suggested that both Ederson and Kevin De Bruyne would be staying. There's even been suggestions in the last week or so that maybe Ederson might be rewarded with a new contract to make him feel like he really is truly the number one here. He's been such an important player for Pep as they've won this record 4 Premier League titles in the row, as they won the Champions League as well. So obviously, it looks as though he'll stay. It looks as though Kevin De Bruyne will stay as well. Again, Pep Guardiola was quite clear they hadn't actually received an offer from Saudi Arabia, despite all the reports linking Kevin De Bruyne with a move out there as well. So it looks like both will be staying. And I suppose in De Bruyne's case, it makes it even more important that he does stay now, because certainly when he was injured for a large part of last season, it was Julian Alvarez who played in that, in inverted commas, De Bruyne role. Well, with De Bruyne being fit, they'll need him, especially now it appears as though Alvarez is going to be leaving.
Thank you very much, Ben. Just to recap that breaking news, Atletico Madrid have agreed an £81 million deal to sign Julian Alvarez from Manchester City. Kwaku, he looks like he's leaving now. Why does he want to leave Manchester City?
It's the first truly blockbuster deal in the Premier League in the summer. And he's a player that we can understand why he wants to leave, because he wants to get more minutes. And if you look at the top line stats, like Ben outlined, it looks very, very promising for Julian Alvarez. In his first season at the club, 31 games played, only started 13 of those, but the goal return's absolutely incredible from the game started. But he didn't start as many games as he would have liked, and the next season was massive progression. Look at last season where he started 31 of the 36 league games for Man City, a season in which they won the Premier League title, scored 11 goals, contributed more in assists, which represents him building his all-round game. And he's a player that offers so much as a striker. And I think, barring Man City, he starts for almost every other Premier League club. But he wants to play significantly more minutes. And if you look at the top line stats, it looks great for him. But if you look at the back end of the season, like Daniel talked about, like Ben talked about, he didn't start the final 4 league games. He didn't even come off the bench against West Ham in Man City's final league game of the season, the game they needed to win the Premier League. In the Champions League as well, didn't start either leg against Real Madrid in the quarter-finals. And crucially, in the FA Cup final against Manchester United, didn't start that game either. So for him, it's not necessarily about the games started, it's about being the main man at the team he's playing for. And he's a man that's won everything on the club and the international stage when it comes to football. So he wants to go and establish himself elsewhere. But like Ben touched on, Man City are a club that sell very, very well. You can see that here. If you look at these selective sales over the last few years of Man City, very impressive in terms of the fees that they've garnered for players that were in their prime. Raheem Sterling was only 27 years old when they sold him to Chelsea. 47.5 million they managed to get for him. And if you compare Man City to the other top clubs in the Premier League, look at Arsenal, look at Manchester United. Man City sell very, very well, and they get fees for players who are in their prime. And this adheres to Pep Guardiola's mantra or philosophy that if you don't want to be here, we'll sell you and we'll get relative value for you, and we'll also go and replace you as well. And they've won the last 4 Premier League titles. So it suggests that they're, when it comes to selling players, Man City are one of the best teams in the league, as well as their output on the pitch as well. What I would say about this Julian Alvarez deal is that Arsenal we see getting stronger and stronger, obviously brought in Calafiori. This might be the first time where Man City sell a player and they might lead to regret it, because he's a player that contributes so much, not just in terms of goals, but assists as well. And I think that this might be the first season where they sell a crucial player that also acts as a backup that they might regret. So I'm looking at these numbers right now. I'm looking at the players they've sold. The only player that you see there, Cole Palmer, is probably the only one that they've got their fingers burnt with. But from your guys' point of view, do you think they'll regret selling Alvarez to Atletico Madrid?
To a certain extent, I think Pep doesn't really regret selling players just because he normally builds a team for players to be quite versatile, to play up front, to play as a supporting striker, play out wide as well. And although Alvarez was, a player that, featured quite a lot, like you said, with the stats, he's not starting if all of the players are fit and ready to go. So I think in that sense, they won't miss him, but at the same time, when you look at their bench options, they're going to have to look at, Oscar Bob to maybe step up his levels now and say, OK, cool, you've been playing well in pre-season, but now you're going to get your opportunity. But he has been playing well, so that might just leave them another opportunity. And Savio's coming, so it's going to be interesting to see how they work now.
Dan, do you think they need to replace him? You look at Arsenal and the way they're strengthening, and now they've lost, a big player who has contributed a lot, even if some of those have come off the bench when Haaland's been injured. But do you think now, when you're in their position, they're usually so good at that? You win the league, you improve. You win the league, you improve. You go again in the transfer window. Do you feel like they need to replace him?
Yeah, we've talked about the games that Alvarez wasn't starting at the end of last season, and Pep Guardiola really trusted Kevin De Bruyne and Phil Foden, Bernardo Silva in those positions. I think you're right to mention Oscar Bob as well. He's really impressed, even in bits last season, but in pre-season as well. I think also Pep Guardiola has mentioned James McAtee is going to be a first-team player this season. He usually plays as a attacking midfielder, so he could perhaps play in that Julian Alvarez position as well. And although they're slightly different players, I also think you look at the players who are there. Jack Grealish, we know, perhaps underwhelmed last season for his own expectations, missing out on the Euro squad. You'd expect him to have another go this season. Jeremy Doku as well, second season in the Premier League, you'd expect him to reach another level. So actually, you look at the attacking players they already have, you'd expect kind of a leap from quite a few of those players with the youngsters and Bob and McAtee and Savio as well being a new signing. Yeah. I think the interesting thing is we've not really talked about incomings for Manchester City so far on these shows, and we've not really seen them linked with many. And now it feels maybe that big signing, especially getting this money for Alvarez, it feels like maybe something's coming in these next few weeks.
They won't be rushed into anything, though. If you think about 2 seasons ago when Man City won the league without a striker, remember when Aguero left and Pep Guardiola was crying when they won the league, said we cannot replace him. They didn't rush to replace him. They waited the season, won the league without a striker, and then bought Haaland in the following season. So if there's not a player out there that represents value for Man City, they won't be rushing to anything because they know they've got a strong enough squad. And this is the benefit of building the squad steadily over the last 3 or 4 years from a position of strength. It means that when a player like Alvarez says he wants to leave, you're not rushed or forced into making a signing that's ill-advised. And that's the advantage that Man City have over all the other top clubs in the Premier League. They've got such a deep squad that if a player like this, who I believe can start for any other Premier League club, says they want to leave, that's a disaster for anybody else. For Man City, that just means they can go again and bring somebody else in if they want to.
This was always going to be an issue, though, really, when you think about it. When they signed Haaland, when they signed Alvarez. I mean, Alvarez probably backed himself to, do well and sort of try and go up against Haaland. I mean, I think no one can go up against Haaland these days, but it feels like there was always going to be a slight issue for Julian Alvarez when they signed Haaland.
Yeah, for sure. But I also don't think that they thought that he would acclimatise to the league as quick as he did. Obviously, Haaland, over 30 goals, he did incredible. But, he's Alvarez's first season, over 17 goals. He was playing in multiple positions. He became a key player. Then he won everything in England. Then he went to Argentina, played a key role, and then winning the World Cup. So he's looking at himself and saying, you know what? This was a great year. How can I kick on from this? This year we've seen that, but again, you're talking about the last few games, and those are the games that all of the top players want to be playing. And even though he had contributions, he'll be looking at himself and be saying, like, why not? Why am I not playing these games? And obviously he's still very young. He's, like we said, there's going to be players in Atletico Madrid that play for Argentina, so it's going to be easy to go over there. But he's a great player, and it's clear that he backs himself. It's been a conversation during this time, and I think, like we've seen over the last few seasons, Pep Guardiola never, ever gets in the way of players that want to leave because he doesn't want it to change, to almost ruin the harmony in the squad. He knows that this is a competitive side. Players are going to want to play. And if they do want to eventually leave, like now, just get the right fee, which they're getting, and it makes sense for everyone.
I definitely think there's a point in there, though, as well. When you look at Alvarez's point of view, I mean, you basically said that he's completed football really in England, hasn't he, and at international level. But also, this move to Atletico Madrid, on a personal level, I think we also forget Diego Simeone as a player. We know him as the manager, but he was a legend playing for Argentina. He was a captain at a World Cup for them, over 100 caps. For Alvarez to play for someone like that, he'll join his teammates as well, international level, like Rodrigo de Paul and Manuela as well. Molina, I should say, sorry, the fullback. So I think for him, on a personal level, there's a lot of pros, really, in terms of going there, probably learning a different style of football under a legend of his international team as well.
£81 million, Kweku, is a lot of money, and especially for a club like Atletico. We did it on Good Morning Transfers yesterday, that, we'll get on to Conor Gallagher a little bit later, but even Conor Gallagher potentially at £34 million would make it into their top 6 or 7 transfers ever. So the £81 million is a lot of money to spend on Julian Alvarez. They obviously wanted him a lot.
Yeah, he's a player that I think is worth every penny of that. He's such a good player, so well-rounded. And for Atletico Madrid, this is a statement of intent. This is not the same Atletico from maybe 5, 6, 7 years ago where they were making Champions League finals, but they finished 4th in the Liga last season, and they're a team that's trying to go in the right direction. It's surprising to see him spend that much money because obviously they got the fingers burnt when it came to João Felix and they've never really recovered from that situation. But when Julian Alvarez becomes available, you've got to spend that money if he's willing to go to the club as well and go and establish himself, like Dan said, in a new league, new culture, and go and play under a manager that's completely different to Pep Guardiola. It's only going to make him a better player. But for Atletico, bringing in Conor Gallagher, they hope, over the next couple of days, and then bringing in Julian Alvarez, they'll be hoping to challenge again in La Liga. They maybe sense some softness or weakness there when it comes to Barcelona, who are consistently going through issues. Obviously, we know how strong Real Madrid are, but Atletico want to get back to where they were over the last couple of seasons, and this signing represents that.
Yeah, Julian Alvarez off to Atletico Madrid. We'll have plenty more on that story to come. Next, our focus turns to Conor Gallagher. Will he be joining Julian Alvarez at Atletico? We'll have details for you on the way. Welcome back. Let's recap the breaking news. Manchester City and Atletico Madrid have agreed a deal for Julian Alvarez worth up to £81 million. Talks have been progressing well between the clubs over the last 24 hours. Atletico will pay £64 million up front with a further £17 million of potential add-ons, which will be a record sale for City. Personal terms still have to be agreed, although not expected to be a problem. Well, could Chelsea's Conor Gallagher be joining him? He's yet to fly to Madrid as negotiations over a £34 million deal continue. And this is what Chelsea boss Enzo Maresca had to say about Gallagher overnight.
I consider all of them a squad player. Then the day by day and the day they work, some of them they are going to play and some are not. So I don't think that there was something wrong to say that Conor or, I don't know, Enzo, Moy, they are squad player. They have to show every day, and then I will take a decision. Listen, in this moment, I think there is something between the player and the club in terms of agreement or to stay or to leave, something like this. So in this moment, there is a talk, and we see how they finish. I said the other time, these kind of things happen always in all the club, every summer, and at the end, every time the final decision is good for everyone. So hopefully the final decision for Conor will be something good for Conor, for the club, and that's all.
That's Enzo Maresca basically saying he's convinced everyone is a squad player. He didn't want to put any of those midfielders down as a starter because it's disrespectful. Sam, what did you make of those Maresca comments?
I think it's fair. I didn't expect him to say anything else in that position. You know, he's only been at the club for a few months now. You know, he's still trying out a few different formations, a few different teams. Players have arrived at pre-season at different times as well. So he's trying to understand the squad. And I think why people questioning it is because people know his philosophy and they know that he wants possession-based midfielders that, you know, are good on the ball and compress, but, you know, their main role is to keep the ball and recycle. And I think Gallagher's strengths are, he's got a lot of strengths, but I think that is an area in his game that he's noticeably improved over the last few years. So people will probably think that he's not trying to answer that question, you know, like straightforwardly, but at the same time, I think he's a new manager and it's kind of something good. You don't really want a manager to be out in players and saying, he's not a part of my plans when they're still at the team, because that would just cause so much more aggro for him.
And we've seen deals break down at the last minute, and like you mentioned, Conor Gallagher was so integral to Chelsea last season. He started 37 out of 38 league games. The only game missed was through suspension. And he was captain for Chelsea the majority of last season. He's got to be respectful. And obviously, he knows what the deal is. He knows that Gallagher's probably moving on. But if he doesn't, say the deal does break down, I expect him to come back into the Chelsea side and play. And so he's just doing what he does as a manager. And also, he's not fully in control of the incomings and outgoings. So he's just playing his cards how they're dealt, really.
I mean, I don't really think people can expect Enzo Maresca to say anything different in that situation. But, you know, say this deal was to break down, which it doesn't look likely that it will. It does look like Conor Gallagher will be off to Atletico Madrid. You would probably back Conor Gallagher to go into pre-season or to go back to the team and actually probably get into that team, because based off of last season, he came up against, you know, two £100 million players and started pretty much every single game.
Yeah, the underlying stats and the headline stats all suggest that Conor Gallagher was Chelsea's best midfielder last season. And so, yeah, you expect him, if this deal was to break down, him to break back into Chelsea's team. But this move to Atletico is good for both Gallagher and Atletico as well, if it does go through. He's a player that you can see playing well and assimilating to life in Spain under Simeone. Simeone obviously has that dogged style, and his Atletico teams play with that intensity that Conor Gallagher brings. He might be able to refine his game a little bit as well. If you look at the effect he had on Kieran Trippier when he moved to Atletico and obviously made the move subsequently to Newcastle. He was a better player for it after playing under Simeone. And so Conor Gallagher making this move makes sense as well. And also, in terms of the PR of Conor Gallagher, we see how Chelsea fans react to Mason Mount because he made the move to Manchester United. For Conor Gallagher moving abroad and not moving to a rival, maybe just maintains that relationship that he'll have with Chelsea fans going forward, because it's clear that he doesn't want to leave the football club. The contract obviously is disputed in terms of the length of time. But I think this move to Atletico Madrid will make him a well-rounded player, and he's moving to a team that's playing in the Champions League. Let's be honest, Chelsea are a huge club, but they haven't played Champions League football for a couple of seasons. And this is a club that's huge in Spain, making that move for Julian Alvarez as well. So it's a great move for both Conor Gallagher and for Atletico Madrid.
Yeah.
I was just going to say on the Kieran Trippier effect as well. I mean, we saw his move to Spain really kind of evolutionised his career to an extent, because I think Kieran Trippier would admit himself, would he have seen himself play for England at left back, left wing back, right back in the Euros, and now what he's been doing in Newcastle as well, without that move to Atletico Madrid, without that work under Diego Simeone? Perhaps not. And I think it's relevant to Conor Gallagher's situation, because we saw in the Euros, the midfield was Declan Rice, and they tried Trent Alexander-Arnold in that position ahead of Gallagher. And then Gallagher came off the bench a few times, but then Kobe Mainoo was preferred because of, as you both have mentioned, kind of style of play, and maybe he was better at retaining the ball in possession, etc. So maybe if Gallagher can work on those skills under Simeone, also for his England career, it could be perhaps the best thing as well.
Yeah, he's handled himself really well in the situation, though. And I think over the last few seasons, we've seen stories about the academy prospects, obviously because of PSR being, the main, players that could be going after Mason Mount as well. And I think he's never really let that affect his game. He's improved game on game. Obviously, like Kwaku said, he's been captain for majority of the season. He leads in stats. And I think that is the perfect example of what, he is as a player. And I think Simeone will love that. And especially where they want to get back into those positions of challenging for the trophy, challenging in the Champions League as well, and seeing their average age increase. Getting Alvarez and Gallagher is a great place to start.
Yeah, well, that's Conor Gallagher potentially going to Atletico Madrid. Aside from that deal, Chelsea are in talks with Atletico Madrid again to sign striker Samuel Amorodion. The fee is discussed at about £35 million. I mean, Kwaku, Sam, both of you here, both Chelsea fans, obviously, he's fairly unknown. Can you tell us a little bit about the player?
I'm not going to pretend to say that I've watched him week in, week out. Obviously, played for that. Or Atletico Madrid signed him from Granada at the beginning of last season. We loaned him out initially to Alaves, and he scored a fair few goals for them last season. He scored 8 goals in 34 league games. He's big, he's pacey, he's strong. He's got those traits of a Chelsea striker that I've talked about ad nauseum, thinking about Hasselbank, Drogba, Costa. But for Chelsea, I don't understand how this makes sense, if I'm being completely honest. Enzo Maresca's talked about Nicholas Jackson and how he thinks he's a striker. Moradion is definitely a striker. And so it'll be interesting to see how he fits into this Chelsea squad. Chelsea have still got Datro Fofana on the books, still got Armando Broja on the books as well. So they need to shift players if they're to bring him in. But he's a player that is physical. He tirelessly presses from the front as well. And so you can see him being a handful and effective in the Premier League. But he's still very young and needs to learn his trade. And so how he fits into this Maresca squad remains to be seen. But Chelsea are making interesting moves this summer, and this is just another one of those.
Yeah, he is one of those players that you can see where his strengths lie, but again, like Kwaku said, still 20 years old, first full season last season, similar to Jackson before he came to Chelsea. The only thing about him is that he's really good in the 6-yard box. That's where he got majority of his goals. And I think that's what Chelsea were missing last season. Even though Jackson has a lot of strengths, in front of goal, he was missing that clinical edge. Also, he's 6'3", dominant. So you can see why in terms of his strengths, but at the same time, the age and the profile and still being linked to Osimhen, still struggling to see how it all ties in together.
Yeah, absolutely right. Still to come on Good Morning Transfers. Could Mark Guéhi end up at Newcastle? We'll discuss that deal next. welcome back to Good Morning Transfers. If you're just joining us, Atletico Madrid have agreed an £81 million deal with Manchester City to sign Julian Alvarez. We'll have more on that to come. It's time to take a look at some of the stories making the back pages. First up, in The Athletic, they report that Manchester United are switching the focus of their search to sign a new midfielder away from Manuel Agarth onto other candidates. The Daily Mail reports Tottenham are pushing to sign Dominic Solanke from Bournemouth, who has a £65 million release clause. And finally, in The Sun, they say Aaron Wan-Bissaka is demanding a multi-million-pound payoff from Manchester United to leave the club this summer. You can keep up to date with all of the transfer stories in Paper Talk. All you have to do is scan the QR code on your screen now. Right, talks continue between Newcastle and Crystal Palace over the potential signing of Mark Guéhi. We understand that Newcastle have had one offer rejected by Palace, but they are expected to return with a higher bid. Guéhi is valued around £60 million. Reports of an agreement being very close are premature at the moment. I mean, first of all, Kwaku, Mark Guéhi to Newcastle. Is it a good move for the player?
It is a good move for the player. I think the reason why people are asking questions about if it's a good move is because of how not poorly Newcastle did last season, but it was underwhelming in comparison to the season before where they finished in the top four. But this is the right move, and much like his play on the pitch, he's taken his career at his own pace. Mark Guéhi is a man that obviously came through Chelsea's academy. I swear every player that we talk about on this show comes from Chelsea's academy. But he's a player that went on loan to Swansea, was there for 18 months in the Championship, helped them get to the Championship playoff final, and then made the move to Palace and has gradually improved season on season. Last year was blighted a little bit by injuries, only played 25 league games, but he's a player that we saw at the Euros was so effective for England and formed such a great partnership with John Stones, and he probably surveys the landscape. And you look at Newcastle, we're going to be missing Sven Botman because he's got an ACL injury at the beginning of next season. Jamal Lascelles is also going to miss the beginning of next season. He goes and sees himself starting straight away for a Newcastle side that expect to be challenging next season. So for me, this is a great move for Mark Guéhi, and it signifies what he's done in his career. He's taken it at his own pace, and I think Newcastle at this moment in time for Mark Guéhi, who's in the prime of his career, is the right move for him.
I mean, Kwaku mentioned the options that Newcastle have. It is quite clear. I don't want to use the word desperate, but they are obviously, they need a centre-back, don't they?
Yeah, I think long-term they're probably looking at Sven Botman and Mark Guéhi as their centre-back partnership. Both of them are 24. But as you mentioned, Kwaku, he has an ACL injury, not expecting him to return until the end of the calendar year. You look at their other options. Fabian Schär, of course, has been so consistent in the Premier League over the years, but he's now 32 years old. Then you look at the depth in that position. You're looking at Emil Kraft, who's a fullback by trade, really, for much of his career. You also look at Dan Burn, where when Dan Burn had to play centre-back last season rather than left-back, I think he was exposed a little bit. I think they conceded quite a few goals in that area, and perhaps it wasn't his best position perhaps anymore. He's made a good trade at left-back, hasn't he? But I think Mark Guéhi would represent someone where they could build a defence around long-term. And also, you mentioned Kwaku, kind of his career. I think maybe not enough credit is given to Guéhi around how he came back from that knee surgery. You know, he missed 12 Premier League games towards the end of last season. He only played a handful of minutes in the last 3 Premier League games of the season. And then to perform the way he did at the Euros with limited international experience, limited tournament experience at that level, I mean, debatably, he should have been the team of the tournament, really. I think we were speaking before, perhaps a bit surprised he wasn't in that team. So his stock hasn't been higher. If they do get a fee for him as well, looking around £60 million, I think if you're Crystal Palace and you've sold 2 players and Mikel Olise and perhaps Guéhi as well, you've recouped over £100 million for 2 players. It's pretty decent business, I think.
I mean, Dan mentioned it there about he was unlucky not to get in that team of the Euros. He was arguably England's best player, or most consistent player across the tournament.
100%. He only missed the 90 minutes due to the suspension that he got in that game, but he was so consistent, and obviously stepping into a role that Maguire had done so well over the last few years. Everyone was questioning who's going to partner John Stones. John Stones also had a few injuries, so there was so much speculation, and he just stepped into it so seamlessly. Obviously got the assist for arguably England's best goal in Jude Bellingham's overhead kick as well. And when you hear a lot of the players talk about, you know, what he brings to the team is his calming presence. You know, he's almost like the piece in that defence, and he's just gone from strength to strength. Like Kwaku said, when he left Chelsea in 2021, going to Crystal Palace. Now he's captained them a few times as well. Got a great partnership with Anderson. Obviously, Palace fans are going to be upset with all of this, but they understand when he's 24 years old. He's very respectful of the club. You've not seen any stories about him trying to force a move or things like that. And he just seems like Kweku said, is just making all the right steps for him to keep on progressing.
Yeah, and he's a player he plays beyond his years, really. He's still early 20s or 24 years old. And I think that he's just going to go from strength to strength. And you mentioned for England, think about the concerns before that tournament. Everybody worried about England's defence. And Mark Gurley stepping into that defence next to John Stones just meant that England were very calm back there and arguably outplayed John Stones, who's one of the best centre-backs in the world. And so Mark Gurley at Newcastle will be a great, great player. And hopefully he can help them play Champions League football next season, because that's going to be the goal. And I think this is the right move for him at the right time of his career.
Yeah, and I think I was just going to say, I think he does want that challenge, and it was very, very clear when he made the move to Palace that he still had that in his view. But also, even with the injury, I think that was the first long-term injury he's had in his career, really. I think he only missed 3 games at Swansea due to another muscular injury. But like Dan said, the way he bounced back from that to come back for Palace and then play such a key role for England, it shows that he's able to come back from adversity and still be the great player that he is.
And just on Newcastle, I think similar to maybe what we'll see from Brighton this year as well, they were blighted by injuries last season. And I think European football perhaps didn't help in that respect as well. So I think we'd expect under Eddie Howe to see a different Newcastle to last season, perhaps to the season before, where they're going to have less games. So I think Mark Gay goes into a team where it'll be a bit more settled, less injuries, and a bit more of a stable environment as well to play in.
Kweku, for Palace then, what does it mean? Obviously, ideally, they probably wouldn't want to sell Mark Gahey after the season he's had. Do you think they'll be OK without him?
Yeah, there's a lot of excitement around Palace, justifiably so, because they're making the right moves and going in the right direction. And last season, they were one of the best teams in the Premier League towards the back end of the season. It will hurt losing Michael Olise. Of course, this Mark Gurley deal is not done yet. We expect that to get done over the next couple of weeks. But they're a side that have shown under Oliver Glasner that they can come and go again. They've got different ways of skinning the cat as well. Last year, I was very, very impressed. If you think about the Monday night football game against Manchester United, where they completely outplayed United, they've shown that it's not only about hitting teams on the counter-attack. They can go and take the game to teams and play on the front foot. That'll be affected, obviously losing Mark Gurley, but I expect them to make the right signings in this summer to replace the player who's been so integral for them. And going forward, obviously they brought in Ismail Assar, who he went away to play in France and it didn't really work out for him, but I expect him to come in. He's a man that knows the Premier League and affect winning straight away. So it's all about coming off of last season and continue to play in the way they did at the back end of last season, because they were one of the best teams to watch and one of the best teams in terms of points returns last year.
Could Mark Gahey be on his way to Newcastle? Right, next up, Matt O'Reilly is a player in demand. We'll tell you which Premier League club wants him, and will Fabio Carvalho be leaving Liverpool? We're going to get to Manchester United now and to Jadon Sancho. It's our understanding that Paris Saint-Germain have held initial talks with United over signing him. Discussions were over the conditions of a potential deal. Sancho could be open to a move with personal terms not expected to be a problem. Dialogue is open between the clubs as they have discussed Manuel Ugarte already this summer. Right, Sancho to PSG, Dan. Do you think it would be a good move for all parties?
It just feels like Sancho and Manchester United are just... The saga continues, doesn't it? I mean, they seem to have agreed to put everything behind them in pre-season. Erik ten Hag said, look, we've agreed to move on. We know what happened last season as well between Ten Hag and Sancho, which led to Sancho going on loan to the Bundesliga, Borussia Dortmund. And he seemed to reignite his career there as well. I think for Sancho, it just seems he probably needs a new start, I think, for his career. It feels like he needs a new environment for himself, somewhere permanently as well, to just start a new chapter of his career. I think for Manchester United, perhaps the dilemma for them as well is they just have a lot of options now out wide. You know, now that they have Joshua Zirkzee, Højlund, who's recovering from his injury in the 9 position. On the left, you have Alejandro Garnacho, who had such a strong season last year, and Marcus Rashford. On the right, you have Ahmad and Anthony now as well. So you have 5 wingers in 2 positions. Of course, the maths isn't great. So, I mean, which has led to Sancho really playing as a false 9 in pre-season because of Højlund's injury. So I think at the moment, you're kind of wondering, where does he fit into United's best team? I think you look at PSG, they've lost the likes of Neymar, Messi, etc. in previous years, Angel Di Maria. So maybe there's more of a natural fit at PSG.
Yeah, and I think he just wants to be the star man, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that, especially with the role that he played for Dortmund in the Champions League. Like, everyone was talking about how well he played, and he almost had that hype that he had before he made the move to Manchester United. And then when you look at, like you said, the options that you have out wide, you know, Garnacho suits Ten Hag's system so well. Rashford has obviously got his best goal contributions under him. You know, Ahmad is having a great pre-season. Like you said, Sancho's playing false 9, and I'm sure he doesn't mind doing that because, you know, he wants to be playing. But at the same time, I think PSG, where they are now, they need signings like that to excite the fans, excite the team, and the player. I think he would love a move like that.
I don't think he's guaranteed starter if he goes to PSG though. They've got some great players out wide. They've got Ousmane Dembele, they've got Barcola, who's a great young player. They've got Asensio as well, and obviously players who played on the middle like Kolo Muani and Gonçalo Ramos as well. So I think going to PSG will represent a fresh start for him. But I don't necessarily think he'd be a guaranteed starter. But I think Jadon Sancho to Manchester United is a cautionary tale for players who are playing in foreign leagues. I think the Premier League is, the grass is always greener. And it's not necessarily, the way that Jadon Sancho plays football is not necessarily suited to a high-intensity league. Over in France or over in Germany, he can kind of use his skill sets to more of an advantage. And so I think he'll do well at PSG. And also I think he suffers from the fact that there's no market for Anthony right now. Nobody's really interested in signing Anthony, whereas Jadon Sancho, off the back of Dortmund gets a Champions League final, he's a player that's very attractive to a lot of clubs.
Yeah, from one winger to another then, we've got an update to bring you on Liverpool's Fabio Carvalho. Leicester are keen on signing him. They were interested in January when they were in the Championship, but he chose to join Hull on loan instead. Southampton have already had a £15 million bid rejected. Dan, is he what Leicester need?
Yeah, I think so. I think Leicester really needs some creativity, especially after losing Keane and Dewsbury Hall to Chelsea, of course, which, you know, we saw how good Dewsbury Hall was for Leicester in terms of contributing to goals last season. I think Fabio Carvalho is someone who is in demand clearly. You know, you mentioned there, £50 million bid rejected that was submitted by Southampton for Carvalho. I think for Carvalho, really, the question is, his future probably needs to be resolved this summer either way. Is he going to stay at Liverpool and have a career there? Or is he going to leave, perhaps, permanently? You know, you mentioned the loan at Hull. He had 9 goals and 2 assists in half the season, which was really promising. But it feels he needs a more permanent solution either way. You have to say for Arne Slot in pre-season, he has been starting almost every game on the left-hand side. But I guess the problem, a bit like Manchester United, was talking about Sancho, they have a lot of options when everyone is in the squad. The likes of Luis Diaz, Jota, of course, Cody Gakpo can play in that position. So when everyone is back for Liverpool, does Carvalho have a future? I think we'll have to wait and see.
Yeah, we were right. Brighton are in talks with Celtic over a deal for Matt O'Reilly. They are among a number of clubs keen to sign the midfielder this summer. Atalanta have already had several bids turned down. Dan, why are Brighton interested in Matt O'Reilly?
Yeah, well, I think Brighton's interest is long-standing in O'Reilly. He's a player they've admired for a long time, but also similar to Carvalho, O'Reilly is a player who is in high demand. You know, we know Celtic have rejected multiple bids for him by the Serie A side Atalanta. I think why would Brighton be interested in him? Well, I think you look at their midfield options as we speak. I think they need a bit more depth there. You know, you look at the fact they've lost Pascal Gross, who could play in that position, but also they're missing that perhaps attacking midfielder. You know, they signed Max Wiefer from Feyenoord. He's a defensive midfielder. You look at who they already have in that position. Carlos Baliba, he's more defensive. And Jack Hinshelwood, who perhaps doesn't have that attacking threat. You look at O'Reilly for Celtic last season. He's box to box. He used double digits in goals and assists last season. So I think he'd be a really promising signing. And we know Chelsea are also interested in him. So he's clearly someone many clubs are admiring. But I think he'd be a really big statement of intent for Brighton, especially with their new manager.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what happens there. Right, there are loads of players without a club at the minute, and we've picked out a few. We haven't actually got long. So, Dan, you've gone for Adrien Rabiot. Yeah,
I'll be super quick. I mean, he's someone that has won many league titles in France. He won the league title in Italy. He's now a free agent. It feels like every summer he's linked with a move to the Premier League, especially Manchester United is one he's been notable. I just wonder if there is a move there for him in the Premier League. You know, we know Manchester United would perhaps like to add a midfielder. You also look at Tottenham maybe as well, losing Pierre-Emile Højbjerg. Could he just provide more cover in that position? Perhaps, but I think either way, he'll be making a move this summer and it'll be interesting to see where he goes.
We've got 30 seconds, so I feel like, Sam, you're going to have to do yours after the break. We're in transfer talk later. Kwaku, you've got Anthony Martial.
Anthony Martial, still a free agent. Obviously, you remember his time at Manchester United, linked with Atalanta. Scamacca's gone down with an injury. He's going to be out for a long time. So Martial is one of the options linked with Atalanta. Of course, we remember how underwhelming the back end of his time was at Manchester United. But hopefully for him, if he does make this move, it can rebirth his career because Atalanta are a very, very good team in Italy.
Perfect. Sam went for Memphis Depay, but we'll do that later on. Right, Good Morning Transfers is back at the same time tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. We've got plenty more to come from the team. Transfer Talk is here at midday. And for a full roundup of the day's news, catch the Transfer Show tonight at 5 and 7 p.m. Coming up, our focus turns to the Olympics. We'll hear live from Team GB gold medalist Keely Hodgkinson after she won gold in the 800 metres yesterday.